This response was brief, but emphasized the abysmal difference between divine perfection and human imperfection. Job refuted Bildad, describing the greatness and mystery of God with impressive eloquence. He acknowledged God's power and majesty, but questioned how this understanding related to his personal suffering. Job reiterated his integrity, making a vigorous defense of his innocence. He listed his righteous actions and his commitment to uprightness, insisting that he had not committed any sin that would justify his suffering. While Job and his three friends were immersed in their discussions, a young spectator named Elihu, son of Barashel the Buzite, remained silent, watching attentively. Elihu had remained silent until then due to his youth, respecting the age and experience of the others. However, when he perceived that the arguments of Job and his friends were not bringing any resolution, he decided to intervene. Elihu was indignant both with Job for justifying himself rather than God, and with the three friends for not being able to refute Job's arguments and yet condemning him. With an ardent spirit, he began to speak, bringing a new perspective to the discussion. Elihu began his speech acknowledging the importance of age and experience, but emphasized that true wisdom comes from God and not necessarily from the elders. He stated that he had waited patiently for the others to speak, but now felt compelled to share his thoughts. Elihu argued that God is just and that suffering can be a form of divine discipline and instruction. He challenged the idea that Job's suffering was proof of his impiety and suggested that suffering could serve to alert and correct, leading people to greater understanding and closeness to God. Elihu highlighted that God uses suffering to speak to people in ways they may not immediately understand. Elihu argued that God is greater than human understanding and that his ways are inscrutable. He defended God's justice, insisting that God never acts wrongly and that there is always a greater purpose behind his actions. Elihu suggested that Job should focus on learning and growing from his suffering instead of questioning divine justice. As he continued, Elihu highlighted the importance of humility before God. He spoke about the greatness of God, who governs the world with justice and power. Elihu exhorted Job to recognize God's wisdom and justice, even when divine ways seem incomprehensible or unjust. Elihu also emphasized the importance of repentance and submission to God. He encouraged Job to humble himself before God and to accept that suffering could be an opportunity for purification and spiritual growth. Elihu insisted that if Job recognized God's greatness and submitted to him, he would find comfort and redemption. As he concluded his speech, Elihu made a passionate call for Job and his friends to consider God's greatness and wisdom. He reminded them that God is just in all his actions and that suffering can have a greater purpose, often beyond immediate human understanding. After all the speeches of Job and his friends, God finally responded to Job from a whirlwind. This divine manifestation was both powerful and majestic, marking a crucial point in the narrative. God began to speak, not to provide direct answers to Job's questions, but to challenge him and lead him to reflect on the greatness and complexity of the universe he created. God questioned Job about his limited understanding of the universe and divine works. "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge?" God then invited Job to prepare himself like a man and to answer his questions, highlighting the abysmal difference between divine wisdom and human understanding. God began with questions about the creation of the world. "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you know so much." He asked Job who determined its measurements, who stretched the line upon it, and about the foundations and the cornerstone of the earth. God highlighted the vastness and complexity of creation, something that is beyond human understanding. He continued challenging Job with questions about the mysteries of nature. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, or caused the dawn to know its place? God asked if Job had penetrated the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep. He questioned if Job knew the treasuries of the snow, if he understood the ordinances of the heavens, or if he could control the heavens and the rains. God also spoke about animals and their mysterious lives. Will you hunt the prey for the lion and satisfy the appetite of the young lions? He described the freedom of wild animals, such as the mountain goat and the wild donkey, which live under God's care and not under human dominion. God mentioned the ostrich that abandons its eggs in the earth, and the horse with its strength and bravery in battle. Each creature, with its unique characteristics, is a testimony to God's creative wisdom. The series of divine questions showed Job his smallness in comparison to the immensity of the universe and the depth of God's designs. God was not only highlighting Job's ignorance, but also showing that the world is governed by a divine order and wisdom that is beyond human understanding. God then challenged Job to explain and control powerful creatures like Behemoth and Leviathan. Behemoth, an immense and powerful creature created by God himself, represents the strength and majesty of creation. Leviathan, with its imposing presence and ferocity, is a creature that no human being can tame or confront. God used these creatures as examples to demonstrate that there are aspects of creation that are completely beyond human reach and control. After God's majestic speech, Job was deeply impacted by the revelation of divine greatness and wisdom. In Job 42:6, he responded to the Lord with renewed humility and a deeper understanding of God's nature. Job began his response acknowledging God's omnipotence. I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. He admitted that he now understood that God's purposes are inscrutable and that his power is unlimited.